All right, good evening, everyone. Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. It's great to see you all here. Great to be back in town. I got in at 9 this morning. One of those interesting days where I was coming from Indianapolis, where I was down at Indiana University coaching the football team, getting them ready for the big game next week. And I was staying at an airport hotel by Indianapolis Airport, and my flight was at 7, but at that hour of the morning, the airport shuttles only run once an hour, so got to catch the 5:15, so got to get up at 4:50, and get to the airport and wait and get on the plane and take an almost 5-hour plane from Indianapolis to Seattle. And arrive thinking, well, it's been quite a day. And I look at my watch, and it is 8:50 a.m. So if I'm a little punchy today, yeah, that is why. But anyway, I'm always excited to get to do these festival preview lectures because it's a chance for me to get re-excited with all this wonderful stuff. We've got a fantastic season in store. The last few weeks, I've been working on putting the finishing touches on the summer season, as well as putting together all sorts of plans for 2027. So it's been a real treat coming back to this and remembering all the pleasure I got out of putting it together. So as usual, I will just walk through it and talk about some of the things that have me excited, and hopefully will get you excited as well. We start on January 23rd with our first pre-concert being the musicians from our Academy for Chamber Music. It's going to be a great concert with a movement from the Kodály Serenade, Zoltán Kodály Serenade for 2 violins and viola, because I guess he didn't know any cellists at that point of life, I don't know, as well as the poem by Ernest Chausson. And then we start the main concert with Beethoven's famous Ghost Trio, the piano trio that has the nickname The Ghost. I remember the first time I heard this piece, and it starts out with this very bold, optimistic statement. And I thought, why is it called The Ghost? And then I heard the second movement. I thought, oh, okay, I get it. And it is the second movement that inspired the name Ghost. And it's interesting because Beethoven only ended up writing one opera, but he always had these ideas that maybe he should be more of an opera composer. And around that time that he wrote the Ghost Trio, which was really at the heart of his success and creative inspiration, he was considering writing an opera based on Hamlet. And there are actually little cryptic words in the manuscript that show that it's inspired some historians to claim that this central movement of this trio was meant to be potentially a sketch for a scene from Hamlet, and his student Carl Czerny said that it reminded him of the ghost of Hamlet's father. So in any case, the Ghost Piano Trio is opening our festival. We then move on to the string quartet by Amy Beach. This is a piece that is reasonably new to me, and you know how it is when you become excited about something as an adult, it takes on a particular fervor. It was a piece that was actually quite popular in her lifetime, was performed a great deal, and it was inspired by and quotes 3 what she referred to as meager tunes from the Inuit Eskimo population, which is very interesting and unusual. It's a piece that is at times very strongly rooted in what we would think of as traditional harmony, and then at times wanders into quite unexpected areas. And as I said, it was quite popular in her lifetime, but in recent years is played less. It's quite challenging, but challenging to play, but I think you're all going to really enjoy it. The program closes with the Schubert quintet that is affectionately known as the Trout. This piece was written when Schubert was 22. He was basically a city boy from Vienna, and he finally took a vacation out to the country and wrote some of his most bucolic music. The person who commissioned the quintet was really taken with a song Schubert had wrote that is called "The Trout," and if you're wondering, what is The Trout about? It is literally about a guy who's fishing for a trout, and somebody's watching it, and he's like, "Oh, I hope the trout gets away," and it's like, "Oh, the trout didn't get away." But it's a very charming song.
It's supposed to be, though, warning young women.
Yeah, it is. It is very much. It's about fishing. It's about a trout, but it's not about a trout. It's like, I wonder if that trout stands a chance. No, trout doesn't stand a chance.
We just bought a dryer. That plays
a kind of an alarmingly long snippet of the trout, right? I've got the same dryer. Yeah. It's like, I thought it would play sort of the first 10 notes, and it's like it goes on for about 30 seconds. So that song, The Trout, the commissioner, he said, I've got a Samsung dryer. Could you incorporate this? No, he said, could you consider incorporating that melody from that song that you wrote that I really, really like? And Schubert said, sure, and it became the basis of the fourth movement of the piece. And interestingly, the song was really, really popular in Schubert's life. Schubert didn't have a whole lot of success in his short life. No, he didn't. Yeah. But the song "The Trout" was one of his successes. Unfortunately, that success did not actually translate to quintet, which was never published during his lifetime, but has since become one of the great staples of the repertoire. And we actually have a little video of a performance of the fourth movement with, if you look closely, that is a very young Itzhak Perlman and Jacqueline Dupre. You're seeing the back of Pinka Zuckerman's head. Daniel Barenboim is on the piano, and on the bass is Zubin Mehta. Those are some excellent sideburns. I like them. Yeah. Superb sideburns. So moving on to... and poor Zubin Mehta didn't get featured at all in that. There's actually, there is a film of that complete performance and of their process of putting it together. It's really, really charming and worth checking out. We found it on YouTube. You can find it just about anywhere. January 24th, the pre-concert starts with the Enescu Third Sonata, and that's with Bela Hristova and Alessio Bax. This is a piece that we've had on the festival a couple of times in recent years. Just going to keep feeding it to you until you like it. No, it's a remarkable piece of music that was written in the Romanian folk style, one would say. And the effect of that is it's a piece that has so much improvisatory feel and so much flexibility within the music. How that's actually achieved is one of the most intricately written scores that I've ever seen. Every little bit of what sounds flexible and improvisatory is very, very specifically written out by Enescu. It's a piece that was very, very popular in his later life through a recording of his great student Yehudi Menuhin, who recorded it with his sister Hepzibah. That's a recording that if you want to prep yourself on the piece a little bit, I recommend checking that out. The main concert starts with a piece that is also influenced by folk music. This is the duo by Zoltán Kodály. It was written in 1914. Kodály, along with his great friend Béla Bartók, in the beginning of the 20th century, embarked on these incredible trips into the countryside, first in their native Hungary, and then later really through a lot of different areas of Eastern Europe, as far as into Yugoslavia, cataloging the music that they would have had no way of knowing was as endangered as it was. It was a remarkable time before the First World War, and of course that cataclysmic event that reshaped all of Europe and really changed society in ways that no one could have foreseen. But so it was after they had the opportunity, after they had the technology to be able to capture this music, and before it was gone forever. And actually, Columbia University has an incredible archive of many of these original recordings. So Kodály's duo is definitely influenced by the music of his native Hungary. And there's something interesting I read recently about Kodály that someone asked him if his music was revolutionary, and he said that he thought of it as being quite the opposite. He thought of it as actually an attempt to keep the music of the past alive, and I think that we owe him a very, very great debt, because there is something of that folk element that is captured that is so very, very authentic, and after the First World War was gone forever. The program continues with the Mozart E-flat piano quartet. This is his second piano quartet. His first piano quartet in G minor is thought to be basically the first piece written for those forces. You know, we now think of the piano quartet as being quite a standard ensemble, but it was Mozart who kind of came up with it. And he was actually signed up by his publisher to write 3 piano quartets. He wrote the first one, the G minor quartet, which we've played here many times, and it sold so poorly that the publisher said, that's okay, you don't have to write the other 2 after all, because it was intended to be sold to amateur players, but the piano part in particular, Mozart wrote it for himself, and he was probably the greatest pianist in Europe, so that made it problematic for people in their houses. But for reasons that are unclear, even though he was released from this contract, he decided to write another piano quartet with perhaps even more extravagant and virtuosic piano part. But he was not ever one to make concessions, and we're grateful to have it. I wish there was a third. Then the program closes with the first piano quintet by Ernő von Dohnányi, we're going back to Hungary. Dohnányi was a fascinating person. He was, as a very young man, he was 17 years old, and his composition teacher was friends with Brahms, and they were on a little vacation together, and he brought this manuscript and said, I've got this kid that's studying with me that wrote this piano quintet. And Brahms took a look at it and was overwhelmed, and he said, bring this kid down here. And he came to visit and brought Brahms the score, and Brahms apparently said, I couldn't have written a better one myself, and he arranged to have it published and really launched the career of Dohnányi, who went on to have a career as one of the greatest pianists in Europe. He became the head of the conservatory in Budapest, was a incredibly important and influential musician in Hungary. And then, the 20th century was a complicated time. There's some controversy around him still, but the way that I think it's easiest to describe what happened is he basically resisted the Nazification of Hungary and went to apparently great lengths to protect Jewish musicians in Budapest. This was something that was widely misunderstood for a long time due to very specific defamation campaigns from the Nazis, and it basically destroyed his reputation for a time. The war ends, and because he chose to stay, which was seen by some as what's the term for this? Not collaboration, but a concession to the regime. However, it's understood now that it was done as a way to protect his colleagues. After the war, he begins to recover his reputation and then decides that he's going to fight against the communists, who then mount another smear campaign and destroy his reputation again. So he comes to America and thinks, what better place to go than Florida State University in Tallahassee, which is where he spent the last quite a few years of his life. Some of his great later works were written in Tallahassee, Florida, and sadly, he was one of these people whose life ranged such an unusual time in history. His music, I think, was seen as somewhat anachronistic at the end of his life, and because of the complications of these real dedicated attacks on his reputation, it's taken some time for his reputation to recover, though certain pieces are just so good they have remained in the repertoire. This is one of those pieces. This piece has always been in the repertoire, always been beloved, but I think a lot more of his music deserves exploration, which is why you see it from time to time right here at Seattle Chamber Music Society. Anyway, a fascinating character, and I'm looking forward to sharing that all with you. The final concert of the first week on the 25th, the pre-concert is, back by popular demand, a concert by F.A. and Mari of cello and percussion improvisations. What can I even say about this? Two of Seattle's most beloved musicians, great friends of SCMS. They just have so much fun doing this, and it's one of those things that I certainly feel like when they do this, I just feel lucky that they invite us to come check it out and watch and listen. So I'm excited for that. We start the main concert with more Mozart, and more Mozart in the vein of his flamboyant and virtuosic piano writing. It's his Piano Trio K502. The Piano Trio, again, we think of that as being a very standard form. Haydn wrote so many piano trios. Mozart wrote an early piece that he called a divertimento for the forces of a piano trio, and then he wrote his famous Kegelstadt trio that uses a clarinet. But his actual piano trios, in terms of violin, cello, and piano, are all quite late. And my thought is that he basically was waiting, or not waiting for, he couldn't know what was coming, but I think inspired by the development of the instrument itself. The piano trio, in some ways, the reason why the piano trio existed is that keyboard instruments were, they were somewhat limited, and they didn't make a lot of sound, to be honest, and they didn't make a whole lot of variety of sound. So to have the treble basically reinforced or supported by a violin, and to have the bass supported by a cello, created something a little bit more substantial. I don't think Mozart had any particular interest in this, and when the piano developed into an instrument that was capable of so much more expression, not to mention volume, for Mozart, this became an opportunity to sort of emancipate the cello and the violin from these subservient roles, to create a real true trio of equals. So I'd encourage you all to listen to the trio in that vein and to appreciate the independence of the parts and the counterpoint of the writing. It's because it's really at it for that time period quite unprecedented. So his Mozart's piano trios are not just beautiful, but historically very interesting and very influential. The second piece is the Prokofiev Violin Sonata number 2. This is his D major sonata that started life as a flute sonata, and we've heard it on this series as a flute sonata from time to time. It was actually his friend David Oistrakh, the great Soviet violinist, who convinced Prokofiev that this was a piece that would work very well on the violin, being a superior instrument. And just kidding, seeing if you're listening. And what's amazing is that in some ways the piece can be seen as almost a direct transcription, but in my mind they're very different pieces, and they work. As a violinist, I should say I prefer the violin version, but I really think they work equally well, and I think that's a testament to Prokofiev's skill as a composer, but also the nature of his music. I always think of his music being something out of... If you'd say that Shostakovich's music is a real reflection on what life really is, Prokofiev's music is sort of a glimpse into a world that we don't quite live in, but we recognize. I think it's a particularly magical piece, and when he transcribed it for the violin, of course, he took advantage of the things that are unique to the violin, adding double stops and pizzicato and chords, and so it's a piece that is hard to imagine when you hear it on either instrument being workable at all on the other, but it's really quite special on both. Program closes, and the week closes with the string sextet by Dvořák. This was a piece that was written as Dvořák was really hitting his stride as a composer in his 30s. He had, I think in his mind, finally achieved some sort of international success. The string sextet, again, somewhat of a theme of this festival, is exploring these genres that we think of as being very much at the core of the repertoire, but someone had to come up with them. And it was really Brahms that not so long before Dvořák wrote his string sextet came up with this idea of writing string sextets. And of course, it's been a form that has been beloved ever since. You can certainly... the connection between Dvořák and Brahms is very strong. Brahms was certainly a great champion of Dvořák, a great inspiration for Dvořák. The second movement of this sextet, we have another recurring theme here of folk-influenced music. It is a dumka. Dvořák famously wrote a piano trio called the Dumki Trio. It's a collection of these dumkas. Now, a dumka is a very... It's tough when you play a piece that has a dumka, and people say, well, what is a dumka? It's very difficult to define because the word itself just basically means thought or idea. Now, how that actually manifests, there's a variety of ways, so it's a little bit difficult to define, but one of the most charming things about this particular movement is the structure is somewhat lopsided, and because of that, it feels extremely conversational, and that's one of my favorite qualities of it is the theme as it's introduced. It is much like talking to someone who has something they want to say, but they haven't figured out exactly how they're going to say it, and maybe had they had the chance to think about it a little more, they would have cleaned it up, but there you have it. That's the purity of the idea comes through. The third movement is a furiant, which is a dance in fast triple meter, and the fourth movement is a theme and variations. It's one of Dvořák's justly beloved chamber works. I'm sure many of you will recognize it, and I'm quite sure all of you will love it. The second week, the pre-concert on January 30th. Well, the January 30th is, of course, a special day, and I'll get to the main concert, but the pre-concert, I'm very excited to have at the festival Mahan Esfahani, who is a remarkable musician, someone who I've never had the chance to work with until now. So I'm personally very excited on this pre-concert that the two of us are going to play one of Bach's sonatas for violin and harpsichord. These Bach sonatas that he wrote for violin and harpsichord, this is one of these confusing things where sonatas of this type are called trio sonatas. And you say, but there's only two people there. And the trio is actually made up of me, Mahan's right hand, and Mahan's left hand. So that's the trio. And when Bach was working sort of in the middle of his career in Curtin, he was working for a Calvinist so there was no need for liturgical music. So basically most, if not almost all of his instrumental music comes from this period. And also on that pre-concert, we have two harpsichord sonatas by Domenico Scarlatti. Now, Scarlatti wrote over 500 keyboard sonatas. They're quite short. They're not what we would think of in terms of a modern-day sonata with multiple movements. They're, in a way, designed like etudes for the keyboard player. They are often extremely virtuosic, and even when they're not outwardly virtuosic, they're often very intricately written for the harpsichord player. And I just can't think of anyone I would rather hear play this music than Mahan, so I'm very, very excited about that. Our main concert is the 6 Brandenburg concertos, and that was when I was lucky enough to become the artistic director here. That was one of my very first projects. It was something that I was really excited to do, and I thought it was high time we did them again. The 6 Brandenburg concertos, when I was preparing for today, I thought, well, what am I going to say about them? I mean, they're some of the most beloved, iconic music that we have. They were not really written to be a set. Rather, they were compiled and given as a set to the Margrave of Brandenburg in 1721. They were likely written throughout the decade preceding this. But one thing that I was amused by in it, so I'm just going to read it in its entirety, was basically the letter that Bach wrote to the Margrave to give him these pieces of music. It's such an interesting glimpse into the relationship in those days between a composer and their patron. As I had the good fortune a few years ago to be heard by your Royal Highness at your Highness's commands, and as I noticed then that your Highness took some pleasure in the little talents which heaven has given me for music, and as in taking leave of your Royal Highness deigned to honor me with the command to send your Highness some pieces of my composition, I have, in accordance with your Highness's most gracious orders, taken the liberty of rendering my most humble duty to your Royal Highness with the present concertos, which I have adapted to several instruments, begging your Highness most humbly not to judge their imperfection with the rigor of that discriminating and sensitive taste which everyone knows him to have for musical works, but rather to take into benign consideration the profound respect and the most humble obedience which I thus attempt to show him. Yeah. So yeah. I thought that was remarkable. These pieces are so great, and they're so creative. They each use different combinations of instruments. The first concerto is the largest. There is some thought and some evidence to support the thought that the somewhat unusual combination of instruments, 3 oboes, 2 horns, a string ensemble, that's just because when Bach wrote it, those were the musicians he had available to him. The second concerto, each of the concertos feature solo instruments and instruments of the ensemble, so to speak. The first concerto, I mentioned this somewhat unusual instrumentation. One thing I'm really excited about is that Bach calls out a violino piccolo, which is to say a small violin, to play the solo violin part. Now, this is an instrument that is not clearly defined and never was clearly defined. When you did the definition of a small violin, it was literally just that. It was a small violin that was tuned a third higher. So it was written instead of with G on the bottom and E on the top, it's a B flat on the bottom and a G on the top. And the reason this is important is in much of the solo writing, particularly in one of the middle movements of the piece, there are chords written in the violin part that if you're playing them on a regular violin tuned in a regular way, they don't really work. And people generally figure out ways to mitigate this. They leave out a note of the chord or do something to make it work. If you have a violino piccolo and you tune it the way that Bach suggests, these chords work with some of the open strings and can be played properly and produce a very interesting sound. Like, people say, well, I might not notice because I don't have perfect pitch or something like that, but you will notice it sounds different. And when we hear an open string that is not at the same pitch as of the other open strings of the ensemble, it's a very interesting sound. And so I was always fascinated by this. And whenever I've been part of performances of the Brandenburg concertos, people just, they say, well, that's nice, but that's not, practical to do. When I was growing up, I was very lucky that my grandma bought me a really nice 3/4 size violin when I was about, 11 or something. This 3/4 size violin was made in Mittenwald, Germany in 1830. And Mittenwald is still to this day a center of violin making, and it historically has always been a center of violin making. And there's a big statue of a violin in the town square of this little village. I was actually just there a couple months ago. And I loved this violin. I loved it so much that I never parted with it. And over the years, still to this day, I would take it out sometimes. And this is not, it's not some exalted violin, it's not Italian, it's not a Stradivarius. It was a beautiful old violin made by a maker who is somewhat remembered, but made with remarkable care and love. And I loved it so much, I would take it out from time to time and play on it just because I loved the sound. And it was, the sound of that instrument was a big part of inspiring me at that age to strive for more in my own playing. So I had this idea, and I spoke to some of my friends in the period instrument world, and long story short, my 1830 little German violin, which is for all intents and purposes a 3/4 size violin, is out here in Seattle strung up as a violino piccolo. And I'm going to play it, and I'm really excited. So, the Brandenburg, of the 6 concerti, number 1 isn't heard that much in person because it has these unusual forces. And when it is, it's almost never heard with a violino piccolo. So, I'm excited. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Number 2 has, as part of the solo group of instruments, it has a very famous trumpet part that is written in the absolute highest range for a trumpet, that it has confounded trumpet players for centuries as to exactly why Bach would have written a trumpet part that high and difficult. And the answer is probably simply that he just knew someone really good who could do it. The third is for only a string ensemble of violins, violas, cellos, bass, harpsichord. The fourth has 2 flutes and a solo violin. The fifth is basically a keyboard concerto. It also has other solo instruments, a flute, a violin, but the keyboard part, which was undoubtedly written for Bach himself, is incredibly florid and virtuosic. And when I saw a video of Mahan Esfahani playing this, I thought, I've got to do everything I can to bring him to Seattle. So we have a little for you now. This is from the cadenza. Every note of that is by Bach. I heard a performance of this one time where at the end of this fifth concerto, a person professing to be very, very learned said, well, I just didn't agree at all with the cadenza. He was playing far more virtuosic music than Bach would ever have written. These Brandenburg Concerti, I think, but I mean, Bach did not shy away from virtuosity. The solo violin part in the fourth concerto is among the most florid writing for the violin by any composer that I've ever come across. And then, of course, there's this writing for the keyboard. The sixth concerto has, as the solo instruments, 2 violas. Don't see that every day, do you? It's just going to be great. I remember so fondly the performance we gave I think it was probably 13 years ago of the Brandenburg Concertos. So it's high time that we've done them again, and I hope I'll see you all there. The next concert that week has a bit of a focus on Schubert. The pre-concert with Anton Nell is his 3 imaginatively named Klavierstücke, D946. These were pieces that were written very near the end of Schubert's life, and the reason that they don't have any real title to them is that we don't really know what they were meant to be. They were only published quite a few years later when there was finally widespread interest in exploring Schubert's music, and they were edited and published by Johannes Brahms, who was Brahms was responsible for editing and bringing out into the world much of Schubert's music, much of Schumann's music. As I mentioned before, he was incredibly instrumental in bringing attention to Dvořák, to Dohnányi. We owe a lot to Mr. Brahms. These pieces were unpublished until 1868. The main concert starts with a piece that I'm very excited about by Bieber, Heinrich Bieber, who was probably the greatest violinist of his day and a composer of incredible creativity. His music, generally speaking, inhabits the world of performance practice period instrument ensembles because it's often quite unusual. One of his most famous pieces is a piece called The Battle, where he calls for the players to do all sorts of things that we might think of as very 20th or 21st century types of techniques, with putting things in your strings to make them rattle and smacking them with your bow. And he was always asking people to tune their instruments in these unusual tunings, so we would have sonorities that are a little bit strange or jarring to the ear. And famously in this piece, The Battle, during the battle, it is an example of just complete cacophony of instruments playing different things at different times. There's no, it sounds as modern as anything you've ever heard. Now, this piece is not particularly out there harmonically or in terms of its construction, but I find it's a really fascinating mix of instruments where we have a trumpet, a harpsichord, a violin, and what was originally written as 3 violas, but is much more practically played because the way the violas in that day were of different sizes. The low viola part is actually written in bass clef and can now be played on a cello. So this is a piece that I quite randomly fell in love with when just sort of surfing the internet looking for oddities that were new to me, and I just hope that you all like it as much as I do. The next piece on the program is the Horn Quintet by Mozart. Mozart wrote some fabulous music for the horn, most of which was written for his friend, a guy named Leutgeb, who was one of the great horn players of the day. And to me, it's one of the most lovable stories of friendship, that these 2 guys, they just razzed each other unmercifully. And it's funny, I think that a lot of musical scholarship has taken a very serious tone over the years, and much has been written and studied about Mozart and his potty humor and the things that he, his letters. And I sometimes think that it's a very good thing that that no one's going to study my letters from when I was in my 20s. And this was actually the first of the pieces that Mozart wrote for Leutgeb, and as they became more and more friendly, I mean, some of the correspondence between these two is just fantastic, but it's one of my favorite little bits is the inscription of one of the horn concerti that he wrote for him later on was inscribed, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart takes pity on Leutgeb, the ass, ox, and simpleton at Vienna, 27 March, 1783. So if that doesn't say love, I don't know what does. Another thing that I think is interesting about that piece is, Mozart, I think to the casual music lover, the perfection of Mozart's music leads us down the path of thinking that it is somehow conservative, and that's very unfair because his music was, as I take pains to point out from time to time, quite revolutionary and extraordinary and groundbreaking. And one thing that's very interesting about this quintet, you think, well, it's a horn quintet, a string quartet and a horn, but if you notice, the composition of the string quartet is not 2 violins, 1 viola, 1 cello. It's 1 violin, 2 violas, and cello. And there's a reason for that. The tonal balance and the balance of range in the piece is different than one might expect. The next piece on the program, this is a generous program, a lot of music on this program, is we're going back to late Schubert, another piece from the last year of his life, the Fantasy in F minor for piano 4 hands. This is, of all the pieces of Schubert that I love, this is on my short list of favorites. Extraordinary piece. I remember very clearly the first time I heard it. I think hopefully we've all been lucky enough to have these experiences where you're driving somewhere and something on the radio is so extraordinary that you're late for the next thing you're going to because you can't stop listening. And that was for me. I was on my way into high school and I heard this piece and yeah, I was late for class, big deal. But four-hand piano music was a popular genre, and for someone like Schubert, who was always kind of struggling to make a living, really, he wrote a lot of it because a lot of homes of a certain class had a piano, but in that home, there was not usually just one pianist. There were often multiple people in the home that played the piano. So music where, say, 2 family members could play at the same time when they only had one instrument, that was a good market. And Schubert wrote really quite a bit of music for four-hand piano, much of which is really extraordinary, but none of which surpasses the heights of this one. This one is one of his great, great works. It is formally a multi-movement work, but in the form of a cyclic fantasy that the music never stops, and it is tragic and profound and amazing. Really, one of the best things out there. The program on the 31st finishes with the string quartet by Maurice Ravel. Now Schubert, he was dead by 31. Ravel was really kind of just getting started. Not that he lived a long time, but he, into his late 20s, he was not finding the success that he was hoping for. And it was a real dream of his to win the Prix de Rome for composition. And so he wrote this quartet and didn't win again, which is crazy because this is, it's certainly legitimate to think of this as Ravel's first great masterpiece, but it's not only a masterpiece of inspiration, but it is a masterpiece of construction and an absolute master class in composing for a string quartet. It sounds at times like there are so many more players playing than four. It was somewhat inspired by Debussy's quartet of 10 years earlier. There are certain parallels you might hear, though it is so uniquely Ravel's own. It's one of my favorite pieces. I love it very much. I think his usage of the instruments, his exploration of what is possible both in each single voice and then as the compilation of the four is unique and absolutely extraordinary. The final concert begins with another string quartet, and I should mention that Ravel quartet is with my quartet, with myself, and Amy Schwartz-Moretti, and Brian Chen, and Edward Aaron. And then we're back 12 hours later, whatever it is, for the 24 hours later. That's an evening concert. Yeah, okay, that's fine. For the string quartet in C major, Opus 20, number 2, of Haydn. Haydn's Opus 20 string quartets are, they were not his first string quartets, but these were possibly the most important string quartets ever written, because they really formed the template of what the string quartet was to become. They were the first, for the first time, quartets were written with truly independent voices. And I mentioned earlier, in context of the piano trio, this sort of emancipation of the bass line, these Opus 20 quartets are the first time where the cellist really becomes an equal member of the group, I think you might say. And this particular quartet is one of my favorites. The last movement is a 4-part fugue that is both musically incredibly exciting and compelling, and also just a compositional tour de force. Again, as I said about, sometimes with a modern perspective, looking back at Mozart and thinking that its perfection somehow means that it is not groundbreaking. I would encourage you all to listen to this Haydn quartet to try to imagine how incredibly revolutionary it was at the time, and how, in certain very important ways, it's revolutionary today. The way that the instruments speak as a group, the way they interact with one another, the way that it is conversational, the way that it is cumulative, and the writing in the fugue is equal to any fugal writing of anyone. It's really just an extraordinary, miraculous piece. The main concert starts with the Beethoven Horn Sonata, which was written right around the turn of the 18th into 19th century. It was premiered by an Italian virtuoso named Punto, with Beethoven at the keyboard. And one of my favorite bits was an early review of it, that the reviewer said, well, of course we all know who Punto is. He's famous, but who is this Beethoven guy? Times change. But this was a piece that it was a bit unusual to write a horn sonata, and his publisher quite wisely decided to publish it also in a version for cello and piano, which you will sometimes hear. But unlike the Prokofiev sonata I was mentioning earlier, where each version is equal, I think this piece really is a horn sonata, and written for an instrument that in those days is very different than the instrument that we know now. But we're so lucky at this festival to have Radovan Vlatkovic coming back, who is just one of my great musical heroes, a supreme virtuoso, but also just a supreme musician. And I'm really looking forward to that. The central piece on that program is the piano quartet by Ernest Chausson. So we're coming a little bit full circle, since we will be hearing the Chausson poem in the first pre-concert. Chausson it was never really planned for him to become a composer. His family thought that he perhaps would go into law, but he just kind of had to do it, and ended up becoming quite unexpectedly one of the great French composers of the second part of the 19th century. He studied with Massenet and Franck. His friend Vincent d'Indy was a great influence, and the music of Wagner became increasingly a great influence. Which, if we have some Wagnerites out there, that particular style of harmonic modulation one does hear in some of Chausson's later music through somewhat of a French filter, I guess I would say. This was one of his late works, and really sadly, Chausson died not old in a bicycle accident of all things. And I don't know this for a fact, but I just picture the poor guy on one of those ridiculous penny farthing things. But apparently, he was on a vacation, and it brought a terrible, abrupt ending to a compositional life that was becoming more and more interesting all the time. You may recall performances here of his concert for violin, piano, and string quartet. It's music unlike anything else, and this quartet is not just a very beautiful piece, but a very ambitious piece of music, a very experimental piece of music, and it's so enjoyable on its own terms, but also so poignant to think of what might have been, but never was. Then the festival ends with the Dvořák String Quintet in E flat. This is a great favorite of mine and probably everybody's. This is known sometimes as his American String Quintet. Now, his American String Quartet is so famous that it has at times overshadowed this quintet, but what they have in common is they were both written during his time in America. Dvořák spent 3 years in America. And maybe the happiest episode of that time in America was the time he spent in a little place called Spillville, Iowa. He was homesick, and apparently there was a Czech community out in Spillville, Iowa, and he decided to go out there, and he absolutely loved it, and was widely quoted as saying that he would have been very happy to spend the rest of his life there. This quintet comes from that time, and Dvořák is, of course, he's Czech. We don't get to claim Dvořák, but American music owes a huge debt to Dvořák in that he encouraged American composers to, I would say, to have ownership over a truly American style, which to that point had not been defined at all. If there was any sort of an American style, it was just basically a pastiche of borrowing things from Europe. Dvořák was very interested in exploring the indigenous musical values of America. He was introduced to a lot of African American music, or music that had sometimes come from slave populations in the South, spirituals. He was interested in the music of the Native American tribes, though personally, apparently, one of the events from which he gained great inspiration was something called the Kickapoo Medicine Show. So I'm not sure we can think of that as being truly authentic Native American music, but there was certainly a great effort and a great desire from Dvořák to integrate these indigenous musical qualities of America. So I think it's fair to say, in a way, that Dvořák was one of the great early American composers, and his influence has been felt for over 130 years now, I guess. We do have a performance, a little bit of the last movement of this Dvořák E-flat quintet, featuring an extremely handsome person on first violin. This is from a performance about 4 years ago, I suppose. You see all those microphones. Now, I have a feeling some of you might have been wondering, as we've been doing this for a little while now, where you'll see some concerts where there's quite an array of microphones. I'm not really sure if this is supposed to be an official announcement or not, but I'm just very, very excited about it because it's something we've been planning on for a long time. Seattle Chamber Music Society is launching our own recording label. And in order to really do this right, it's not really a recording label if you make a recording and then 6 months later release another recording. We wanted to compile a catalog that allows us to release in a methodical way and really make this real. And so if you like this, coming later this year, this will be in our first round of releases, the 2 Dvořák string quintets, the quintet with 2 violas and the quintet with string quartet and bass that was recorded at the same festival as, again, 3-4 years ago. So that's our winter festival. I'm excited, and I hope you all are too. Thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts or complaints, now's your time. Yes.
Well, how do you take a 3/4 violin and string it as a piccolo violin? Do you have special strings?
What I did is this was the recommendation of a couple of my friends that are in this world is basically to find low tension strings and low tension strings for a full-size violin. So therefore the tension on the instrument, tuning it up by a third is not going to create a huge amount of tension on the instrument and will actually probably allow those strings to speak in the way they were intended to. They'll have an appropriate amount of pressure. Yeah, it's a little confusing. So as I said when I was mentioning it earlier, it was not, it was a small size violin. Whether or not it was meant to be a child's violin, it was not so clearly defined in 1830 like a half-size violin or a 3/4 size violin like we have now for students growing up. This was just a small violin that is basically a 3/4 size violin. So you can buy strings that are specifically made for a 3/4 size violin where the tension of those strings when strung up to modern concert pitch, they're designed to be at their best at that tension. So if you were to tune that up a third, the strings are they were not designed to be at that high a tension. And also, I love this violin and I don't want to have too much tension on the bridge and have it crash through the top or something. So rather what I did is I found, because you can, most string companies make strings in a variety of tensions. They are often just simply labeled as light, medium, or heavy. So what I did is I got full-size strings, so they will be wound more around the peg, up in the peg box, and I got light gauge strings so that when they are tuned up on this little violin to the B flat, F, C, G, they will be at the appropriate tension where those strings will actually be resonating at their peak. So, yeah, took a little bit of thought. Yeah, I mean, I love it. There are these things in it that they just don't make sense otherwise. And it's funny to me that more people don't do it, but it's a little bit unusual, and I've for my whole career, I've gotten such a kick out of playing around on different violins all the time. So I don't mind switching back and forth between different things. So, yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah.
Does playing the 3/4 violin put any different stress on your wrist?
No, I mean, it's sort of, it's funny when I moved to the 3/4 size violin from playing my regular violin, it's physically the same feeling as when I moved from the viola to the regular size violin. It's just sort of a contraction of the mechanism. Everything feels just a little bit drawn in. Yeah, but luckily, of course, all the ratios are the same. So, but the thing that has taken some practice and getting used to, is that it feels different, but it also is, because it's a transposing instrument, it's very unusual for a violinist. I mean, wind players, horn players, clarinet players, trumpet players, all the time they're used to reading something that's written in one key but sounds in a different one. I'm not used to that as a violinist. So when I see something and play it, I see something that is, for example, written, this happens a lot in the piece, where it is a D unison double stop. So that would be on a regular violin, the open D string and then a blocked D on the G string. And you play that. And so I see that on the page and I play it and 2 Fs come out. And I'm like, okay. But that's the note that's supposed to come out. It's just that the part is transposed. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. And it's one of those things, like, I'm glad I'm doing it with friends, because I know that no matter how much I've been working it on my own, when we're putting it all together with everybody and all of a sudden the music is 3-dimensional, and I'm going to do something incredibly dumb in rehearsal, and that's why we have rehearsals. So anything else? Well, thanks all for being here. It's really great to see you all, and I'm really excited, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you very much. Thank you. One last thing that I forgot that I was going to mention. We do have a special, a very special thing happening at the end of March. I'm going to be in Barcelona, Spain. I'm going to be performing with the National Orchestra of, help me, Catalunya. Thank you. And the music director there is someone very beloved in Seattle. It is Ludovic Morlot. And so I'm going to be performing Bernstein's Serenade for violin and orchestra with Ludovic and the National Orchestra of Catalunya. And we have planned a trip around this, and I know that some of you are coming on that trip, and it's going to be great fun. There's my performances, there's performance by the great Elizabeth Leonskaya at the Palau de Musica, which is one of the great concert halls of the world. We're going to visit Pablo Casal's house. And it's possible we're going to eat some pretty good food there, too. Lots of events, some great stuff. I was just told earlier today there are apparently 2 spots remaining. It's going to be great fun. So if you're interested, talk to a member of staff, find out more about it. It's going to be a really, really good time. So I know I'll see some of you there. And thanks, everyone. Thanks again, and I'll see you at the concerts. It's going to be great. Thanks.